Good morning. Good morning, Karen Friedman, Agnifilo. Good morning, Legal AFers. Good morning, everybody watching the Midas Touch Network. We are now in week 2 of the Donald Trump criminal trial in Manhattan for the falsification of business records to interfere with the 2016 election. As you all know, jury selection has been complete. We have a jury that's been fully sworn in, 12 jurors, 6 alternate jurors, and we are getting ready for opening statements, which will take place in just a little while. The judge will provide some instructions to the jury about the case. Karen, you'll go through what to expect. Then we'll hear the opening statements. Then let's talk about who is going to be the first witness from all of the reporting. Arguably, there could be some potential last second changes. I don't expect that to happen. So we'll tell you who we expect to be the first witness called by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office based on all available information. I want to remind you all that each and every day, at the completion of that day of trial, Karen Friedman, Agnifilo, and I go live once again. We do it every morning at this time, then again every afternoon after trial is complete to give you a recap and a summary. And after the day of trial, we have a handy dandy scorecard where we give you a summary of everything that went down for that day. So we are now in day 5 of trial, but Friday was day 4 of trial because Wednesday is a day off of trial where Justice Merchan, who's presiding over the case, holds his calendar for the other cases. So last Friday was Trump trial day 4. Here's a rundown and a reminder of everything that happened on Friday. In the Trump criminal trial, a jury was selected and sworn in. Donald Trump fell asleep again, and we did the reporting on whether or not Donald Trump was passing gas. We'll leave it to you to remember that. There was a Sandoval hearing that was held, and we should expect a ruling on that, of course, this morning. The Sandoval hearing is in the event Donald Trump decides to take the stand. What are the parameters of a cross-examination of Donald Trump if he waives his Fifth Amendment rights and testifies? The Trump lawyers were complaining on Friday, let's pull that scorecard up one more time, that they didn't know the order and that the district attorney was not sharing with them the order of the witness list. How do we know then that Alan Weisselberg is going to, excuse me, how do we know that David Pecker is going to be the witness? We'll talk about that in a little bit. It's through some leaks, and obviously the witness is going to have to be prepared. A lot of people know about the examination, so I gave away a little bit there. David Pecker, we believe, is going to be the witness. Justice Merchan made clear that this was his courtroom, and any of Donald Trump's behavior and not following the rules would not be tolerated. Then the appellate division rejected formally yet another attempt by Donald Trump to try to stop the trial. So Karen, I always tell everybody that I'm your hype man, so I just give you that summary, let the audience build a little bit before turning it over to you. I misspoke briefly. I didn't mean to say Weisselberg. I meant David Pecker. Tell us, what do we expect today? Who is the witness? Why is this important? What are we expecting that we're going to see? How is this going to go down when the jury shows up? What's the judge going to do? How long are opening statements? Take it away.
So Ben, good morning. So if this were like my other job, because as you know, I'm a legal tech advisor to the show Law and Order. If this were the show Law and Order, and this was the trial happening, what we would do is we would walk in and we would hear opening statements followed by the first witness. And maybe that will happen and maybe that will not happen. And the reason I say that is because a lot could happen over the weekend to jurors who go home and start to think about, oh my God, I am on this case. And you never know what somebody is whispering in their ear or saying to them about safety or second thoughts or getting in the crosshairs of Donald Trump and his people. You just never know. And the reason I say this is, first of all, that happens in even normal trials. Sometimes people just say, I can't do this. I've had second thoughts. I can't sit in judgment of someone or whatever it is. So that could happen anyway. But if it does, then we'll see if the judge seats one of the alternates, if he wants to get more alternates, because the whole jury, I don't believe, is sworn yet. And when he swears the whole jury, including all the alternates, that'll be one of the first things he does, Judge Mershon, will do tomorrow. Then you can no longer do things like pick more alternates. But if he hasn't done that yet, and we have a few juror issues tomorrow, then I could see them calling in another panel and potentially getting more jurors. One of the things that happened that made me think about this, Ben, was a couple of the jurors are being identified in publications, which I'm not thrilled about. I saw that over the weekend that a couple of news articles were I'm looking on my computer as we're doing this, and there's a blog that talked about, it's a blog by someone named David Latt, and he is talking about two of the jurors, the two that are lawyers. He even talks about where they work and gives more identifying information about them than I thought you're allowed to do. And his response is, well, it was reported in other newspapers. I think it was law.com and one other publication that did this. So he's just repeating it. Anyway, the fact that that was done, I believe these two jurors were picked before the judge gave the order telling the reporters in the room not to report anything on people. I still think it's irresponsible to either post about it or repeat it. So those two jurors, let's see, because they're going to know that, that it's not going to be too hard if you work at a particular law firm and all of a sudden the person is out on jury duty for 2 months. People are going to ask, or at least surmise, that they're possibly on jury duty on the Trump case. And so that presumably outs them, and hopefully it won't bother them. Hopefully they will remain steadfast. But I just bring that up because let's see if the trial starts as planned today. So if it does, the first thing that the judge will do is he'll swear the jury in, and they'll become this unit, if you will, or this body. And then the judge will charge the jury, and it takes about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour, where the judge will give instructions to the jury, and he'll introduce the parties, and he'll talk about the burden of proof. He'll talk about that it's the people of the state of New York, represented by the lawyers here, that it's their burden, and their burden only to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt, that the defendant has no burden. The defendant doesn't have to give an opening statement. The defense attorney through the defendant through the defense attorney doesn't have to give an opening. They don't have to cross-examine witnesses, and they don't have to put on a case, and they don't have to give a summation. And if the people didn't prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt, then the jury has to acquit. So those are the types of instructions. The other thing the judge will instruct them are things like, the people are going to call witnesses, and the lawyers might object, and I'm going to sustain some and I'm going to overrule some. And if I sustain an objection, the question without an answer is not evidence. So you cannot infer anything based on the question alone that somehow there's an answer. I mean, it's like I'm saying these off the top of my head because I've heard them so many times. That the defendant doesn't have to testify, and you can't You can't infer anything negative about that, that the defendant sits there presumed innocent throughout the entire trial. Every single minute of every single day, this defendant is presumed innocent until he's proven guilty and until he's found guilty by you, the jury. And so they drill that into their head. So each judge has his own instructions. He'll also tell them what time he expects them to be there every day, what time he expects them to leave, what time lunch is. It's always between 1 and 2:15 p.m. Eastern. He'll talk to them about having no contact with anybody and not reading anything, and possibly even turning off the alerts on your devices so you don't get news alerts all day long about Donald Trump. I mean, think about it. Let's say there's some kind of evidentiary ruling, and let's say out when the jury's not in the room, the lawyers start arguing about something, and let's say they argue and one person wants some evidence and another side doesn't, and the judge rules it can't come in, right? What if the news report starts ruling on that, or starts reporting on that, and those alerts go on their phone? Judge rules important evidence does not come in. Of course they're going to see it. And they're not supposed to see it, right? They're only supposed to see the evidence that's before them and that comes to them. So all those types of instructions are what the judge is going to start today with. Then the next thing that happens is opening statements. There might be a few other pretrial rulings, like the Sandoval that you alluded to, by the way, before openings, but the judge could also reserve that. And that's the ruling that would tell the lawyers what prior bad acts of Donald Trump would the prosecution be allowed to cross-examine him on should he testify. So you might see a Sandoval ruling today as well, but I doubt it. I think he'll wait a little bit for that, and any other, and then openings will happen. And I think the prosecutor is going to open. I would say about an hour, maybe less, 45 minutes to an hour. And I would guess it's Josh Steinglass, who is a senior trial counsel and one of the co-lead lawyers on the team. He's been, he's a very, very experienced, seasoned prosecutor and trial lawyer. So I can see him giving the opening. And then the defense may or may not open. We'll see. And usually they do. So I suspect they will. And it could be, I don't know how long. And the question will be, will they get to any witnesses today? And if you remember, Ben, the court is closing early. I think they said 2:00, but don't quote me on that, because today is the first night of Passover. So for those who observe, they're shutting down early. So I don't know if we're going to start witnesses today or if we're going to wait, but that's what I see today. There is no way we're going to get to cross-examination today of anybody. It'll just be a very basic introduction of evidence, maybe an hour or two. So we'll see.
So what do you make of the purported first witness that, that this information was leaked? David Pecker, the former chair and leader of AMI, which owned the National Enquirer. They, of course, were involved in the initial catch and kill, as it's being referred to as, catch and kill efforts for Donald Trump, where they would go and they would find these in concert with Donald Trump on his behalf and for his benefit, because the 2016 election was heating up, and they would go and find these stories of people who Donald Trump had sex with, or a doorman at one of Donald Trump's buildings who may have dirt on Donald Trump. And they would basically, the National Enquirer, through its parent company, AMI, would go to these individuals on behalf of Donald Trump as part of a conspiracy. They would say, hey, they'd probably say it in not a nice way, but hey, we're going to buy your life rights, or we'll buy your story. They would negotiate a price. And then instead of publishing the story, they would never publish the story. That's the kill part of the catch and kill. And then if a person like Karen McDougal, for example, or a doorman or whoever, wanted to tell, hey, this is what happened, they want to do an interview with CNN or whoever, then AMI would say, you can't do that. We own your rights. If you've signed a non-disclosure agreement, if you talk about it, we are going to sue you. You've waived all of your rights to your stories about Donald Trump. Now, because they were doing that for the benefit of Donald Trump, they were paying people hush money to shut them up from telling these stories. That was either can be construed as a gift, a financial benefit to Donald Trump that taxes weren't being paid on, and also that were in connection with the 2016 election. So it was serving as a proxy for a financial contribution for essentially the Trump campaign. So AMI and David Pecker eventually, when they were busted for this and they realized on their own, I think, hey, this may be problematic. This may be a crime that we're committing, or the heat's coming on us and we can't be doing this anymore. They stopped doing the catch and kill. So when it came to the Stormy Daniels story, this is, I think, the narrative that's going to be told. This is how the facts are going to be presented. I think we're going to hear about this in the opening statements. I think I'll get your take on it, Karen. Then Donald Trump had to come up with another scheme to catch and kill another damaging story, the Stormy Daniels situation where he had sex with her while Melania had just given birth to Barron. And AMI, National Enquirer, wasn't doing it. So they ran it through Michael Cohen. And ultimately, the payments were then falsified as legal expenses to Michael Cohen instead of what they actually were. So having Pecker and other AMI employees, but Pecker talk about whole long relationship with Donald Trump and his friendship with Donald Trump and the business relationship, and that they joined into this conspiracy. Pecker's had since entered into a non-prosecution agreement with the feds. You can talk about, Karen, more what that means, but Pecker's basically admitting that he committed this crime with Donald Trump, and he stopped committing the crime, but that Trump was aware of this hush money payment scheme. So I think that if Donald Trump's defense is, I didn't do this, I had nothing to do with it, putting Pecker up first to talk about how he and Trump were shoulder to shoulder, buying off women and buying off bad stories and hush money and doing hush money payments, I think that's going to be a very dramatic first witness and also kind of lay the foundation. If I got anything wrong, Karen, feel free to kind of correct me, but that's, I think, in layman's terms, what's going to be laid out and why Pecker's important.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ben. There was a lot of speculation about who the first witnesses would be. And when I think it through, I'm not even sure they're going to call Stormy Daniels or Karen McDougal or the doorman. I can't recall his name. They don't really need any of them. If they have, it's because it really doesn't matter if he had sex with Stormy Daniels or didn't, or if he had sex with Karen McDougal or not. We know the doorman story is false, right? It doesn't matter. The point is because it wasn't about that. It was about keeping in bad negative stories away from the press so that he could steal the election, frankly, right? That's what the allegations are, that he would suppress information from the voting people so that he can interfere with the election, I think is the word that is being used in the case at the trial. And so it doesn't really matter if the activity happened or not. What matters is that somebody was going to say that it did and that he didn't want that story out. Now, if it didn't happen, you'd wonder, well, why would he pay that kind of money? But that's neither here nor there. Again, it doesn't really matter. And if you remember, Stephanie Clifford, who goes by Stormy Daniels as her stage name, she at first said that it didn't happen and then later said that it did. And so that could be fodder for cross-examination, right? So I'm not really sure they're going to call her as a witness. I would just say the doorman didn't happen and it doesn't matter. So why do the other two matter, right? Because it's not a crime necessarily, obviously, to do that. It's the falsifying the business records, which is what makes it a crime. And it was in order to interfere with the election. That's what makes it a crime. So because it's not clear that they're even going to call them at all, which they probably will, but they don't have to, you want someone who's going to set the stage and talk about the whole scheme and talk about exactly what was going on. Alan Weisselberg is out of the question because he's serving jail time for the second time in a row for Trump. And he refuses to in any way acknowledge Trump's role in any of this. So he's no use for the prosecution to be doing that. Plus, the reason he's serving jail time is because he lied under oath in the Engoron case, the civil fraud case. So because he recently lied in a proceeding, I don't think the prosecution really wants him. So he's out of the question. And you can't call the defendant. It's not like the civil case, right? Where we saw in Engoron's case, you can reach across the aisle and call adverse parties, including the defendants, and they have to testify for you, which is so interesting. You can't do that in criminal cases. And so, because there's an absolute right against self-incrimination in the United States Constitution, right? Everybody has the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. So who else is there to set the stage? You have Michael Cohen and you have David Pecker. Well, David Pecker, as you, for a while there, I thought we were saying Pecker, but now I think we're back to Pecker. I don't know. He knows about the whole scheme, right? He was involved in the whole catch and kill scheme. And so he would be my first bet as who would set the stage and tell the whole story so that the jury knows what the whole story is. So I think most people would have bet that he is certainly in the top one or two people that you would call first.
And Karen, do you think that's going to be some explosive testimony? You think it's going to, when do you think, I mean, one, you're going to have Donald Trump sitting there, hearing Pecker. And don't get me wrong. I mean, there were adverse witnesses against Donald Trump in the New York Attorney General civil fraud case. And of course you had, Michael Cohen testify. I just think it's going to hit different with Pecker, or Pecker. I'm going to call him Pecker, though, given the case. In that, Pecker is someone who Donald Trump used. I mean, think about it, how Pecker put out all of those stories on Ted Cruz, all of the things about Ted Cruz's dad, being the person who killed JFK and all of the stories that the National Enquirer talk about, the ultimate projection and confession. They would do all the stories. Ted Cruz is having an affair with all of these women. I mean, they would write whatever Donald Trump would tell them to write. And Donald Trump's relationship with Pecker and AMI goes back well before 2016. They were one of his tools to basically spread all of his propaganda and all of his lies in New York. And so setting the foundation for decades and decades of malfeasance together, right? Then, because I think it's important in the direct exam, correct me if you think I'm wrong, Karen, for the prosecutors to establish this wasn't just 16. Trump's going to call up Pecker and go, hey, Pecker, I hear you got the National Enquirer. No, this was 20, 30-year relationship, friendship, business relationship of putting all of these stories out there. I remember there were stories about, Pecker had like a vault where he would even keep some of his deepest secrets and stuff and all of the dirt that he would do for people like Donald Trump over the years. And Pecker made a whole business out of that. So you're going to build that foundation, get to 2015 and 2016, how because Pecker and Trump ran in the same circles, and they had been engaged in this kind of back and forth of kind of propagandizing everything for all of these years, why it was that Pecker took that role in 2015, 2016. And that kind of gives you the layup and the foundation, though, and about Cohen. And why did Trump use Cohen? Why did they have to come up with the scheme that they did when Pecker couldn't do it anymore, and how that was arranged? So, and what I was saying, Karen, is when Trump was, for Trump to be there, and he's going to be sitting there, arms crossed, maybe sleeping, maybe stewing in his own whatever, and he's going to be watching that unfold. I think it's going to hit different. What do you think?
I mean, and yes, I agree. And the stakes are just so much higher, right? This is criminal. And I think it's going to be very hard for these former friends of his. They're going to have to look him in the eye. He's going to look them in the eye. They're going to have to identify them. Do you see the man in this courtroom that you're talking about? You have to point out the defendant and the prosecutor. That's just something that the prosecutor has to establish, is that the person sitting here is the person that you're sitting in judgment of. It's how you connect the dots. And that's why you always see in the movies and on TV, do you see the person in this courtroom who did X, Y, and Z? It's a legal requirement, and why it's done in every case. So they're going to have to do that. And they're going to have to sit there and in front of everybody and tell exactly what their role in it was. So I do think it's going to hit differently, like it should and does for every defendant. And I wonder if they'll feel intimidated. So that's what I'm sort of interested in seeing, is how the witnesses do, because he is intimidating, and his, it's got to be hard.
Karen, final question here. This week, what do you expect to be accomplished? It is a holiday week. What do you expect to be accomplished by close of this week on Friday? We'll leave it at that.
Well, there are a couple of things happening this week in addition to opening statements and witnesses testifying. There's also a hearing on Tuesday on the order to show cause to see whether Donald Trump violated his gag order. I think we're up to 10 different times that the prosecutor has in their order to show cause. I'm actually co-authoring with a bunch of people a written explanation on the law of contempt in New York, because it's quite complicated. And in fact, Ben, we need to do a little bit of that primer before the order to show cause hearing on Tuesday for everybody, so that they know what to listen for. So maybe Tuesday morning we'll talk a little bit about that, because that's a big deal. And then we'll start to see witnesses for the rest of the week. I think we'll be lucky if we get through the first witness, believe it or not. The first witness could take a while, and it just depends on how long the defense cross-examines the first witness. If they don't want to cross-examine them for very long, I could see us getting to the second witness, even third witness this week. Maybe not. I'd say at most we'll be up to 2 witnesses this week, but not much more than that. They're very substantive witnesses, and I think the directs and crosses are going to be quite long for all of the witnesses in this case. So that's what I think we'll do this week.
Well, Karen, thanks for helping us all make sense of everything that's happening today. Week 2, day 5, underway. Keep checking back in on the Midas Touch Network YouTube channel. We'll be doing hot takes throughout the day on all of the major developments. Of course, there will be a hearing happening at the same time as the criminal trial in the New York Attorney General civil fraud trial over the defective bond or potential defective bond that Donald Trump posted through Knight Specialty Insurance Company. And of course, later in this week as well. And we'll have live coverage of it here. We'll have the oral argument live on the Midas Touch Network. The Supreme Court set to hear Donald Trump's assertion of absolute presidential immunity in the Washington, D.C. federal criminal case, where Donald Trump claims that he could order SEAL Team 6 to kill his political opponents, because he says that if you are a president or a former president, you can do whatever you want. We will cover that here. We will have the audio of the oral argument as well. Karen Friedman, Agnifilo, thank you so much. Legal AFers, thank you so much for watching. We've got a busy day ahead of us, so let's get to it. Shout out to the Legal AFers. Shout out to the Midas Mighty. Make sure you hit subscribe right now.
Enough! Send it to the big house, not the White House. Get the new exclusive tees, mugs, and stickers right now at store.midastouch.com. That's store.midastouch.com.